Cool. So there we go. So welcome everybody. This is our second virtual masterclass that we've done in partnership with Summize. And I'm particularly excited about this one, I think, of all of them. We last in the last session we looked at whether or not we can trust AI and whether we can trust tech, and we had a really good conversation with Tom Pratt, who is the GC at Summize. And in this masterclass, we wanted to explore. It feels like a very large question here, but the future and the future of law and the future of what we can expect and how I think many of us are feeling, and hopefully leave you with maybe some ideas about how you can maximize your potential now and how you can work with tech, but also hopefully that feeling of connection and community and coming together and understanding that I guess we're much stronger when we come together and try and solve a problem all together. So a little bit about me and about being human for those who don't know. We are a learning and development company essentially that deliver human skills training. Everything we do is based on human factors and about how we can all work together individually and as part of a team to maximize our performance. We really drill down into sustainable performance, which means that we're doing our best work for longer and more efficiently and more effectively. And the beautiful thing is that if we're going to maximize our performance, then we need to also be healthy. So a large part of it comes down to being well and how we can drive efficiency and our maximum potential to contribute, but in a really sustainable and healthy way. So that's a bit about me. Hopefully lots of people will know about Summize and their tech solutions. Rich, do you want to say a quick hello and a bit, maybe two lines on summary on to Summize
Yeah,
for
so
anybody
thanks,
who
Claire.
doesn't know?
Yeah. Welcome to everyone on the call. My name's Rich Somerfield. I'm CTO at Summize. So my job's very much kind of looking at what we're building, why we're building it, and then where we're going in the future. So it's a extremely interesting role in itself. I think you couple that with the legal market, which is innovating fairly rapidly in adoption of tech. And then you add AI into the mix, and it can get crazy at times, but it's all super enjoyable from a exploration perspective. And yeah, I really, really enjoy talking about these things that are maybe slightly more on the horizon. Some things are a bit closer, but some things are a bit further out. And I think that AI particularly is obviously it's relevant. People are interested. There's like impact related to it as well. I think it's a very good topic to be discussing.
Thank you very much. So I think I'm going to hopefully keep this as interactive and as practical as possible. So what I would say is that please don't stand on ceremony. If you've got questions, please just raise your hand and we'll try and take them as we go along. Let's keep this as conversational as we can. Feel free to contribute within the chat. Um, uh, newsflash, I'm not the best person in the world at monitoring every angle of every contribution of tech. Humans aren't any good at multitasking. It's all task switching. That's for another day. So I'll try and do my best. But if you can do the virtual equivalent of jumping up and down with your hand in the air if I miss you, then please do that. But first question, let's judge the room where we're at the moment. How are you all feeling about tech, AI, and the future? That's a really big question. Um, Maybe drop it into the chat. How are you feeling? If anyone's feeling brave enough to come off, maybe there's a picture that one of these faces that this woman's pulling might neatly sum up how you feel. Rich, where are you on the spectrum of this lady? If you were one of this one of this lady's faces, where would you be?
I would say probably great catch by all of them at the same time, really. Like there's a whole personally speaking, there's a whole like range of emotions. Like you can kind of there's obviously a lot of talk in the press and looking across things and feelings about how's AI going to impact individuals, teams, businesses, personal lives. I think most people, probably a high percentage of people, have experimented with maybe ChatGPT or whatever and seen some good bits and some bad bits and kind of extrapolate that. I think from it's interesting times, I guess. You look back over 20, 30 years ago, like the impact that the internet's had on the world, on business,
Mm,
it's been truly transformative. And I think when we've spoken in the past, talking a bit like kind of like the human, like what's one of the strengths of humans? It's like that adaptability. And I think that's, change management, adaptability is kind of all interesting bits. Like some people are slightly more comfortable with change and some people are slightly less comfortable with change. I always think it's kind of dependent. If you're on the receiving end of change, it feels a bit worse. If you're on the delivery end of change, it always feels like you've thought about everything, you've delivered everything. It's kind of oftentimes on which end of the spectrum you're on. Uh, Personally speaking, I think I find the AI advancements we're seeing incredibly interesting and opportunities to change perhaps how we work, perhaps get rid of some of those more boring activities and kind of look to kind of some more interesting bits. But I think like for me personally, it's just always kind of bearing in mind that adaptability side of things is that things are going to change. And whether it be AI, business, whatever it be, the market, whatever it be, kind of keep it interesting stuff and then see how I can incorporate that into my day to day. For example, at
Yeah.
Summize, we there's AI in the product if you want to use it, and if you don't want to use it, that's fine as well. But there's kind of AI in the product to kind of help you do certain things. And then from a developer's perspective, probably interestingly, it's one of the more affected roles, I think, at the minute. I think it's one area where, particularly around Claude Code, some of these more like developer-based AI integrations, we're seeing quite a shift in the developer role itself, which obviously affects us from as well. But yeah, I kind of like to see it as an opportunity to kind of how can I do different things, explore different ideas and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it's positive, but tinged with that kind of interest and slight concern and all those faces on screen as well, I think.
I think you fall into like the majority here. Looking at the comments from everybody's put in, like it absolutely resonates that. I think there's a lot of excitement, which is I think is really popular. Lots of excitement. Um, and Laura, mixture between smiley and thoughtful. Love that. Um, but I think it cautiously excited. I can see that. Excited, but also a bit overwhelmed. I think there's a huge amount of potential, but it is kind of that overwhelm. And maybe we can touch on some of that in this session. Um, but when we ask that question, I've asked this question to lots of different groups. The answers can be quite similar: excited, overwhelmed. Some people are scared. Some people are really nervous, anxious. Um, some people are just like gung ho and think this is going to be, the best thing. Most lawyers think are that kind of cautiously excited because that's the way we are, I suppose, wired. But I mean, from a human potential, from a human perspective, and from a psychological perspective, we're hardwired not to embrace this kind of level of change. We have the red dot that people will see in the middle of this brain. Many of you will have seen before, but essentially that's your amygdala, that's your chimp brain. It's the oldest part of your brain, and its whole point in life is to protect you. It's to make you aware of any risks out there, any risk factors, and really prepare you to fight or flight or fawn or flop or one of those responses to protect you, to make sure that you can pass on your genes to the next generations. So when we see something new, our natural reaction is really to fight it or run away from it or freeze and not adopt it. So that is one of the main challenges that we see, that essentially when there are big changes coming, we struggle often to respond to them in a way that will maximize our capacity to adopt them and accept them. So that's kind of the baseline. So if you are feeling anxious or you are feeling overwhelmed, you do feel quite triggered by kind of the advancements in the future, and you're concerned. Completely and utterly normal. That is the way that we are wired. So I think for me, naming it and saying, do you know what? You're not alone, you're not unusual. If that's happening, then it is really powerful. So bear with me as I ask these questions, but they will hopefully come apparent, the background and why. Is I'd like everybody just to think about what the favorite thing about their role is. What's the favorite thing you do as part of your role? And again, maybe drop it in the chat or share. Please feel free to do either. But what's the favorite thing about your role? And while I'm asking that, you to think about that question. Rich, what's your favorite part of your role?
Favorite part about the role? I think it's like right on a bit of a tangent here, but it will hopefully connect back into it. So I was fortunate enough to be head of a research team for a while. It was in tech doing research things, and we're kind of looking at how we could advance in certain areas. And I was new to that type of role, and it started out being like, we need to come up with that, like the magic bullet. Like, how can we take something that doesn't exist today and will it into action, kind of like from a totally blank sheet of paper? And it was incredibly difficult to do that and largely unsuccessful. And I think what we kind of discovered over time is that it's actually innovations more likely to come from connecting things which haven't been connected together. So you think about what a motorbike is, it's an engine plus some wheels. That's a bit of a terrible analogy, but it's kind of connecting bits that already exist and putting them together. So I think what I particularly enjoy about my role is looking at speaking to customers, lawyers, etc. Like, what do they do? And then how are the things that I've got from my experiences, can we connect those bits together to solve some problems? So there was a there was a particular event that sticks in my mind about speaking to a lawyer, and they said one of the things they do frequently is they don't really like using Microsoft Word because they're used to printing out a contract and then sticking the fingers in between the relevant pages. So that's like a 10-page contract or whatever it be. They'd kind of put their fingers into different parts of the contract so they could flip backwards and forwards between the different bits. And they were saying that they found like Control F to do find wasn't particularly useful because it was you lost the context of where you started from. So that's the scenario we had. So what we built was a really simple way of just bookmarking different parts of the contract. So inside Word itself, they could just bookmark a particular page effectively where they were putting their finger, and then they could just navigate through those bookmarks and then go back to where they were previously. So that was a great example for me of something I really enjoy, which is taking a real world problem which had a solution, but was a bit like impractical, having to print out every single contract. And then how can you connect that back into something that I could do from a tech side of things and then put those two bits together? And then that customer loved that solution and continue to use it. But I think that the bit I really like is just those seeing those connections,
Mm.
seeing different bits that maybe from my experience, somebody else's experience. And I think this is why diversity is always so important, is that people have different experiences. If you can then connect those dots across different experiences, you end up with something which feels like innovation, but actually it's really just it's very simple, really. It's just connecting bits. Yeah, and I find real joy out of that.
Mm. No, I love that. And looking at people's comments come in, there's a lot of that. I think Mush creating order from chaos sounds a bit like your example, Rich, to be fair. Um, but a lot of these comes about being an enabler, working with different people, the variety of the work, continuous improvement, all of those things. And I think what's really interesting here that not one person said that the favorite part of their role was legal research or kind of that real academic, knowledge-based recollection. Um, and I think that's really interesting. And if we hold that, and then I ask everybody to think about the next question I've got from you, which is essentially like, where do you add the most value? So as a lawyer in your team, where are you adding the most value for your stakeholders? Um, and Rich, it sounds like while people are thinking about that and maybe responding, it sounds like actually where you add the most value for your stakeholders isn't in prescribing a use for a product, it's almost by ideating and creating solutions and kind of building on that. Is that fair to say?
I think so, yes. I mean, it's part of the time. There's a phrase that I really like, which is when you kind of sometimes you think the expert is the one that knows all the right answers. And in most scenarios, that's kind of true. But I think in most scenarios, it's the person that knows the right questions to ask, which helps understand what answers you need. So I think that's what I try to bring to the table when we're having our internal conversations, is trying to what find what those questions are. People already know the answers to them, but it's just working out which are the questions that are relevant to ask,
Mm.
and then using that to then coordinate and kind of move forward. So, we've got. I'm certainly not an expert in reviewing contracts and doing any kind of legal work, but sometimes it's just a case of just teasing out some bits about the process and the flow and how you do particular bits. Ask those questions, get a bit of context, and then, like I say, connecting that into other things, you can kind of see real opportunities for advancement. I think so. That question thing is something I always really hold dear to how I
Mhm.
try and address a lot of things as well.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because some people like people in here is that kind of the risk awareness allocation, finding practical solutions, like looking at things through a strategic lens. Um, that's the bit where people add most value. What I find really fascinating is that there's a statistic that some people may have seen before that from a study that LexisNexis did, and albeit this was in 2021, and obviously we've seen such a shift now in the way that the use and the adoption of AI in tech. I imagine that this will have come down, but the starting point, if we think about it, is that in-house teams in this study were found that were spending up to 53% of their time doing these kind of routine, low value tasks. And I think, and I'd be interested from everybody to see if this resonates, but certainly when I find myself in the weeds, when I've been in practice, I find myself embedded in those weeds and it's pulling me down just to carry on the metaphor, if you like, that actually it means that I can't spend the time doing what I add, where I add the most value because I'm so busy being very responsive. I can't be as proactive as I want. So when we're doing these tasks, or when I'm doing the tasks, if you like, that are adding the least value, I'm then not able even to realize my own individual potential. And I think that then moves us on to the next statistic that I find really, really troubling, and that is that lawyers are also in the bottom 7% of careers for happiness, which is really low. I mean, bottom of all careers, 7% of all careers. This was a study that was done by an American publication. And the reason they found that really was two of the main contributors were that they weren't using their skills, utilizing their skills to the way that they thought was the most meaningful use of them. And they found that their actual work didn't bring them the meaning and the purpose that they needed. So when I look at this through the lens of actually we know from what we've seen with the comments that people know where they need to add value. Statistics show that actually we don't have the capacity to focus in on that area where we add value, and really that contributes to us not enjoying our careers and not enjoying the potential of it. So if we use that as kind of like a starting point, we then kind of look at, well, what tools have we got to get us out of those weeds? And I think that is where, for me, certainly, I join everybody in being quite excited about tech and AI. Say some stats on here about the potential for tech and AI. The top one comes from Summize's Legal Disruptors report, which I know, Rebecca, you've done a lot of work on. And I think this is the 2025 statistic about the number of legal teams are using AI in some part of their work. Quick show. How many people here are using AI in some aspect of their legal work? Most people. And I'd be really interested to know, are people use it for multiple hours a day? Oh my goodness, yes, I sit. So I doing a bit of consultancy work in-house at the moment. And I sit next to the head of finance, and we're constantly joking about the amount of time we spend on AI and Copilot. But yeah, so yeah, Deborah, minimal but growing, interesting. And can I just ask, are people using Copilot and ChatGPT, or are people using specific legal tools? I think that's always quite interesting to know. ChatGPT, specific legal tools. Copilot, Gemini. Yeah, interesting. So a wide range, but there's a huge amount of adoption already of AI in tech. We've come along quite quickly, I think. Interesting statistic about, if we use generative AI, we can save up to, 32 and a half working days a year. Not sure how they calculated that, but it's certainly out there. And interesting is 44% of legal work tasks could be automated with current AI capabilities. Rich, what are you saying? Like, are you buying into all of those figures? Are you arriving with skepticism at some of those bottom two, or does that resonate with kind of what you're seeing and what you've heard?
I mean, there's more detail behind each one of those ones, obviously, like that what those actual like that last one, 40% of work tasks could be automated. Like, are they the high value experience ones, or are they the low value, really, basic stuff? I think it's more in line with the basic stuff. But I think the coming back to the previous slide about the in the bottom 7%, I think oftentimes we see this quite a lot when we're talking to customers that the volume, like the inbound volume into the legal team is out of control. And I think that often, I mean, for myself personally as well, like when you're happy or sad, like oftentimes when it's difficult is when you're not in control of your workload. And I know it's one of like motivation factors as well, is how control are you of the work coming in. I think from that perspective, I think it's tools like Summize and AI and stuff like that. I think like taking on that kind of intake process and sifting through, I think there's a real opportunity to kind of bring AI more into that one, prioritize the work and kind of get the human back in control a bit. I think in terms of some of the more advanced reasoning, expertise, the context for where the business might be going or decisions you've made in the past, I still think AI at the current level is still some way away from that. Obviously, people have mentioned in the chat about using chat experiences, Gemini, ChatGPT, etc. And I think oftentimes when we're using it, in particular in development, and when I see other people using it as well, there's a lot of steering that goes on in those chat threads. Very little is it the one shot. You put some with a document, for example, and you get an immediate perfect answer. I don't see that very frequently at all. I think that's like low single digit percentages where that might even happen. Whereas what often happens is that chat evolves over time as you kind of steer it in a particular direction. Oh, I didn't mean it like that. I meant it like this. Or, kind of,
Mm.
oh, can you just redo that again? Maybe have a different look at it. And you kind of like navigating through it. It's a bit like a director kind of role, really. And I think that's actually a really good um, area for where the current AI tooling, and I think for the foreseeable future as well, I still think it's not going to change massively out of that place as well, is that the humans still doing that director role and then coordinating it. And I think that's what we see from a development perspective. We see it from our customers as well, is the humans still in control, but maybe getting rid of some of the more menial or even I think actually goes beyond menial. I think it's actually some of the generative stuff is actually quite interesting and impressive what it can deduce from stuff, but it's never right first time, I would say. And then you kind of evolve and work with it. And I think that experience is really interesting as well. That's kind of an opportunity. But then puts the human back in control again, which may be coming towards that kind of the job satisfaction or the happiness in your role. Maybe it kind of brings back that to being again back in control. Get rid of those the truly boring and menial tasks. But
Yeah.
then kind of the get to leverage your experience, your judgment, all those bits. I think that's exactly what you do when you're steering it. You are doing those judgments and experience. And can will eventually all that judgment and experience be available to the AI? I mean, at some point in the future, possibly. I don't see it in the near and medium term. I don't see AI replacing the entire workforce
Mm.
because it just doesn't have the context. And if you've got to spend a whole heap of time refining that context and feeding it in, I don't think he's seen the gains anyway. So I think
It's
there's
interesting.
still
So, there's a brilliant slide which actually that leans on really closely. This was a slide by that I saw from Walter Kloyer, but it really resonated with me, and I thought it was a really interesting graphic about where we are now, where the future is. But this kind of top right section of this graph, which is like the human element, which is the bit that actually we're not sure that AI and tech will ever be able to do, which is kind of the global strategy, the bit that we really enjoy. Everyone said, recognize that's the bit that we enjoy doing. That's the bit that we can add the most value. Um, the business considerations, negotiation, the contextual suggestions. That's the piece I think, especially, Rich, you were talking about just then. It's all this whole added layer of things that we can't do, and then you've got the kind of the more mundane, if you like, what I would lovingly call the churn. Actually AI and tech can do that, and hopefully it will get to a point where it can free us up. Um, And there's a lovely slide that I heard this. If he's written a book, but if you ever get to hear him speak, I thoroughly recommend it. The guy called Gert Leonhard. And I was at a conference and this came up, and I was like, oh my goodness, he's written my business plan just here. This is the case for being human. But ultimately, this was his angle that machines don't have the hunches, they don't understand, they don't care, they don't imagine, they can't think or feel. And that's really our USP. That's what we've got, which is really interesting. Um, and I think that's a really interesting point to pause actually, because Jess has raised a question which was niggling in the back of my mind as we were talking that about the director role and about how that will be our changing role. And that is, if our role is becoming more of a director, then what are we going to do to make sure that the next generation are trained in a way that means that they are going to be able to contribute? Um, Kanika, I know you've got your hand up. I don't know if that was a related point
No, funnily
or
enough, I hadn't
not.
seen Jess's question. It was exactly that. It was about, Rich, you spoke about the mundaneness of the task that it's picking up, and it was how you balance that with training up the juniors. So same as Jessica's point, actually.
Yeah, interesting. So I don't know, Rich, do you have any thoughts on that?
So I do, and I think I saw Jessica's message before, and I was going to mention it as well. I think it's the probably the most important question about the whole question set. I think really. So we'll come back to that. Well, I'll touch on it, but I think like football, I really like football. 30, 40, 50 years ago, the apprentices got paid what £50 a week or whatever it was, ridiculously low kind of amount of money, and their role was to clean the boots. That was what they did when they came into new football team. And it kind of those like hard knocks, that's really like it's unpleasant work and all the rest of it kind of thing. It's not a very nice experience and not getting paid very much. Look towards today, where do 16, 17-year-old, whatever footballers that come into a new company, into a new team, what happens to them? They're getting paid multiple £1,000s a week and they're not cleaning boots anymore. That's not what they do. Now, I don't really know the answer to this, but is going through that boot cleaning thing a rite of passage? Do you need to do that to be a good footballer? I don't know. Or is it a yesterday problem that's gone away now? And I don't know the answer to that particular thing. Do you have to go through difficult, boring activities that are mind numbing to be able to get to that point where you've got the expertise? I don't think it's particularly true. I think kind of we don't do some of those bits anymore, so I don't think it's true. But I think coming back to the question about the people coming into the role, should they be doing those tasks? Should you be cleaning boots in that particular example? Or is there something else that you move beyond to? I think it's a responsibility of, I mentioned that, the director role. I think it's the responsibility of businesses and the more senior staff to actually treat their juniors with care and consideration. I think those are really important. I think it's just like any kind of junior role. It's an important place. You've got to bring juniors on. You've got to take them through the different stages. That might change a little bit with AI, but I think it's really important we continue to do that. I think it's such a fundamental part of any senior's position is that you are not just looking up, but you're looking down as well and bringing people on that journey as well. I think it's really important. AI may get rid of some of these particular aspects, like that boot cleaning thing, but I don't think it invalidates everything. And I think it's really kind of important for us to continue to consider that and bring people on.
I think it's like there's questions that I always reflect upon, and I think about some of the more mundane things I did as a junior lawyer. It's funny, Deborah talks about paginating, redacting by hand. I have fond memories of both of those things. But I wonder whether, so things that I spent many an hour by a photocopier as a trainee and even as an NQ, laying out documents for really, document heavy completions. We'd have rooms full of documents. And at the time, I suppose what I'm pondering is where was the value in that? But actually, from doing those exercises, laying out the documents, even doing the photocopying, I was getting exposure to all the documents that were part of the deal. Now, I say that because now everything's done through DocuSign. So everything isn't, it's not all laid out. So how do we make sure that there's that whole kind of that general context now how do we do it with juniors? I think you know that I think it feels like there's a really big leap, and we'll come on to this later as well. There's a really big leap that AI is changing everything, but actually, you know, what have we seen before? What have we seen before? These incremental steps, these marginal changes and little nudges that have changed the way we're doing stuff, and that hasn't wrecked the lawyers. The lawyers now who don't spend hours next to a photocopy machine or laying out documents or sticking post-it notes where people needed to sign in different colours. You know, that I don't necessarily think that's you know actually meant that they're worse lawyers as they get further along in their careers. So that's the thought that I've had. And then the other thought that I've heard recently, and I think this is a really interesting idea, is and if anybody doesn't follow him already, I thoroughly recommend you do. A guy called George Hanna, who is I think he's a solicitor apprentice at Lewis Silkin, but he writes a lot about AI. And one of the things that he's really calling upon is some of the AI powered tech solutions to work with the person who's using it. So rather than having one solution for everybody, almost you fill in at the start, you know, I am a trainee, I am an NQ, I'm 3 years qualified, I'm a GC with 20 years experience. And it almost challenges you along the way. So it's kind of teaching you at the same time. It's not doing all of the thinking for you. It is not giving you the answer. It's kind of prompting you and helping you along the way. I don't know if have you seen anything like suggestions like that, Rich, or I think there could be quite interesting uses for it.
I think so. I mean, I've been not sure if anyone's heard of OpenClaw, but it's the latest hotness in AI recent weeks. But that's like a very much more of a personal assistant. And I think that one of the things interesting about that is you actually kind of feels a bit weird at times, but you kind of train it with a personality. You kind of work through how you like things to be done and how you want it to respond to you, for example, kind of things like that. And it's quite interesting kind of going through that exercise about kind of engaging with an AI. I think the ChatGPT world tends to be a little bit more like a blank sheet of paper, and you start from scratch every time, which can be quite time consuming. So this kind of ability to kind of manipulate and modify the behavior of the AI is super interesting.
Mm. I think it's I think I'm always as well. I really shy away from the feeling of this is the way we've always done it. And so, you know, I think many of us have probably have been at the wrong end of this is the way we've always done it, so that's how we're going to do it. And I don't think the legal industry in particular is so slow with these advances. It's like just because it's been done this way before doesn't make it right. Well, it might have been right then, but it's not necessarily right now. I think that's always really resonates with me. So, you know, really mindful of that. But I don't think it's an easy question. If it was an easy question, we'd all have the answer. But I think even just hopefully the fact that we're aware of it is really powerful. There's a conversation going on the chat, right, which I also just want to flag because I think it's an interesting one, not directly, I suppose, related to what we're talking about now, but it's about the way that law firms are costing with AI and about is this also going to be the shift that we're going to see? Because, you know, if we're using more on AI to save time, then actually how do you then charge on the billable hour? You know, that seems quite strange. Now, I suppose question for everybody, if you've looked at any engagement letters from law firms recently, two have come across my desk recently, and both of them included a clause around value-based pricing. So it was, and I imagine this is exactly aimed at kind of the time savings that people get from using AI. So rather than saying that we're just charging on an hourly rate, what it's actually saying is we will charge you on the value that we are delivering, and that may not be the hourly rate, which I thought was really interesting as well. So there's kind of like the shift, and could this be the end of the billable hour? I've been saying that for years and years, I think, but thoughts. So in an ideal world, then we've been painting this picture of, you know, that humans, we're going to have this the top end of the spectrum, the chart at the top right, which is, you know, bear with us on the junior question, but AI and tech is going to be taking on the churn, going to be taking on all those boring, mundane tasks, and all the exciting stuff, the strategy, the creativity, everything like that is going to be left for us humans, which sounds absolutely wonderful, and sign me right up. However, just to be the realist in this, is that actually what's going to happen? Is AI, is all of that going to be the preserve of the human, or actually is AI going to encroach on that? And I wanted to spend some time in this area because Rich and I, when we were prepping for this call, had some really interesting conversations about this. And I think the first one is around the point of creativity, so that I kind of captured the remainder, if you like, the remainder of the human skills into creativity, communication, and connection, saying that actually these are the things that AI will really and tech will really struggle to do. But one of the conversations that Rich and I were having was around creativity. And when we think about the way that humans make decisions, and actually, we think of there's two ways. One is about pattern matching, seeing what we've seen before, and then formulating a response on that basis. The other is more about intuition and kind of leaning into our body, reading the room, listening to your gut if you have a gut reaction to something. And kind of thinking, well, AI and tech will never be able to do that. They will never have that kind of intuition. Or will they? That's the question that kind of drove me on. I think the pattern matching, actually, that's exactly how it's set up. But what about that kind of intuition, the reading the room? Will it be able to do that? And we had quite an interesting conversation, Rich, around this, I think, around like actually AI and tech is getting to the point where it can begin to read people's reactions. It can be able to read the room. I don't know if you want to say a bit more about that, Rich, about if you can recall what we were talking about.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a couple of bits there, like the fact that most, as it happens, as we are now, like most stuff these days is happening on calls, remote calls. And I think we're already seeing technology which watching participants for eye movements and all the rest of it. So technology to kind of do that. So I think there's an element of that, but there's still that, I don't know, instinctively, there's still that feel that humans are different than technology. I think there's just that inside feel that we're still different. I don't know how much that is true in certain areas. So for example, we were talking
Mm.
about creativity. And you think like, how do LLMs work? Well, they're based on the context they've got before, the words it's written out or the words it's generated before. What's the most next likely word? So a cat sat on the mat is always my example that I use for that one. So mat is probably almost certainly the right next word. It's not going to be the cat sat on the stovetop. It's unlikely to be the next word. So anyway, that kind of like generative, what's the next most likely word given the stuff that's gone prior to it? And I think like literally when I'm speaking right now, what am I doing? My brain is scrabbling around for the next most sensible word to say in my sentence. And I think that so there's actually a very similar, a significant amount of similarity between the two bits there. I think the difference I would say is I've hopefully at least got some kind of target in mind that I'm trying to steer my words to. So there's that combination. But I think in terms of where AI is going around context engineering, so there's obviously been a lot of talk about prompt engineering for the past couple of years. Context engineering is really the next advancement in how to work with the LLMs. And the context engineering is around how can you feed all the bits of information that are relevant to help with that generation of the next word. So that might be the conversation we're having right now,
Mhm.
the conversation we had yesterday, maybe the last month's information distilled into a summary, maybe it's the business strategic goals, all this huge amount of information. How can you feed that into the AI prompt in such a way that you can help steer it in a directionally sensible way that then it can come up with the answer that you're looking for? So you kind of put all those bits together and you're thinking, well, actually, from this perspective, there's actually quite a lot of similarity between how humans work and how the AI systems are working in terms of this generation stuff. So not that's going to replace us necessarily, but I think can it generate stuff that doesn't exist today? I think it can, but it's probably a little bit more constrained, and it all depends on the context you're feeding it. And I think probably people are seeing that themselves as well when you're working in ChatGPT or Gemini, etc. Kind of if you can help give the right context before you start asking it
Mm.
to do stuff, you can actually come back into a better place. So I think that particular thing, I think connecting, obviously these things can do a great job of um, consuming multiple pages of information and producing a quick summary as well. So I think on each of these fronts, I'd say the actual AI is in a similar space to where humans are, maybe a bit behind, but like similar space. I think there's still something around that human element to it. So you look at different other areas. So flight, for example, like bees, wasps, flies are significantly more efficient and effective than anything we've produced technology-wise as humans. So I think the biological side of things, it still feels like it's more tuned, more advanced, more capable than we're going to get to with technology. And I still think there's something to that. How much of that is me and us being humans and wanting to believe we are superior? I don't know. But I still think there's something around that element, the biological stuff is so much more efficient than any technology we've ever produced.
I think I
Significantly so.
think I think that's really interesting, and I think this comes down to one of the I think one of the things that is lacking in kind of our education generally, but particularly for lawyers, is we focus so much on the cognitive. We focus so much on the cognitive part of our brain, and we don't lean in really at all to kind of, if you like, the somatic way of knowing. And sometimes that's almost seen as a bit woo-woo. So, somatic being about like what can we learn from the way that our bodies react to everything? Well, many of us will know that we are excited, way just from the physical reaction, the butterflies in the stomach, when your hair stands up on your end, it's kind of like there are so many other ways of so many sources of information. I think just the way that we are taught is that it's all, the cognitive way of knowing is kind of is supreme over everything else. And actually, is there a way that in the future, the cognitive way of knowing is less important? Because actually, what does set us apart is the fact that we have this ability, this intuition that exists biologically. And will set us in good stead because you were talking about prompts, and I think really interesting, and you can kind of shape your bot or your chat GPT or whatever it might be to talk to you, but you still have to shape it. You still have to put that effort in. It's not just existing alongside you. You still have to do that, and you still have to remember to include it. Whereas I suppose the beauty of what we have as humans is that we are present when we're present. Okay, so if we're in a room with people, we are absorbing this information by osmosis that it's kind of subconscious. We don't think about doing it. Arguably, we should be more present at times, but we just do it. And so that's probably one of the ways where we are deeply efficient, beyond what tech can do. But I think
Yeah,
that's
totally
it's
agree.
really interesting. Yeah, and I think the other part about it says on here about communication and the empathy and the curiosity and humility and can tech do that? Can tech show empathy and humility and curiosity? It's interesting because I think it can, but the question for me is it authentic? And actually, we know that from the trust we were talking about, trust in the previous masterclass, one of the key attributes, key ingredients of trust is really about believing that something's authentic, believing that, and actually, can AI and tech ever really show you authentic empathy, authentic humility? Like, can it do that? I'm not sure it can, but I don't know. So I think there's kind of like all of these kind of unknowns that are up there that tech may be able to do it, tech may not be able to do it. Actually, where does that leave us? And I think where I then got to really was around, well, it, what are we doing? It comes down to, what do we know now and what can we use it for right now? I think we are very good, probably because of our roles as lawyers, that we want to look ahead and we want to scope the environment for risk, but actually that can cause us, it can either detract our attention or it can take us, it can trigger us in ways that are deeply inefficient. So maybe the question is, what do we know now? Like maybe it's about drilling in and saying, well, what do we know now about how AI and tech can help us? And yeah, you've got to have some focus on the system, on the future. You can't just bury your head in the sand, but equally let's bed down into what we know now, but also what we can control. Because I think this is the other aspect that I think of a lot with the future is we're bombarded with all this information, and so much of it we have absolutely no way of controlling. So many people will have seen these circles of control, with the outside being, everything you can't control, and then it gets smaller and smaller. So yellow is what you can't control, examples. Pink is things that are within your circle of influence but aren't directly within your control, and green is within your control. Now, if you apply that to AI and tech, you're kind of going, well, actually, what can I control about AI and tech? It's probably pretty small, but it can be things like, how you use it, and also how you're preparing yourself to stand alongside it. What you can't control, is what tech is being developed out of, San Francisco. You can't control that. You can't control what functionality it's going to have. You can't control whether it's going to come sweeping in. You can't really even control, in many of us, whether our business is going to adopt it, and also how safe our own roles are. All we can do is we can influence it by making sure that we are clued up, and we are filling the gaps that AI and tech can't do now, but also we're showing up. And then it's like, well, how do I control that? What do I do? So for me, it's like coming back to this, like, what can I actually control, rather than going off with my squirrel brain down the leafy lanes of, the worst case scenario, like what can we actually control? Just pausing there to ask people, like, does that resonate with everybody? How are people feeling about this kind of the fluctuation between the controllables and the non-controllables? Do you find yourself worrying about things you can't control in the context of AI and tech, or are you quite good at bringing yourselves back to actually let's just focus on the task in hand? Be really interested to know. Silence. Silence in the chat too. Yes, it worries me slightly, just the speed of AI and keeping up. I can't control this. Absolutely. Can't control it, Rebecca. I worry more for my children, what careers will still be open to them. Yeah, interesting. I come back to that, Crystal. Like, it's an interesting one because we were talking about this as well, I think, Rich, weren't we? We talked about this when we were chatting about there are so many careers that I didn't even exist when I was at school and university. Like that just didn't they just didn't exist. So I kind of keep telling myself that now, that a lot of the jobs that I know now may not exist, but there may be a whole other raft of what others might consider way more exciting ones out there that replace them. Yeah, that's a good point, Moshe. If you start worrying about it, you'll never stop because it's huge. Yeah, hard to imagine what the future work will be in 2 years, let alone when my kids grow up. Yeah, it's all, it's all hugely. It's just such a massive, massive question, and I think we can get overwhelmed with it. And the other tool that I thought I'd share that I come back to quite a lot is about thinking about resilience, but also thinking about evidence about how we have responded to change in the past, specifically in the legal profession, and about how, yes, AI and tech feels massive. And I wonder if part of the reason it feels so big is that it doesn't just cover law, it's everything. So it's like everywhere, it's all the time, it's massive. But we have, as an industry, have evolved massively over the years. I mean, if you think of, I've got some examples here, but like tech and automation, yeah, we're talking about AI and, at the most extreme now. But, I was joking with Crystal on LinkedIn about, I spent 48 hours in a room initialing a data room bundle to exchange, like 48 hours, and then that was moved on to a CD to exchange. I mean, goodness me, if you ask trainees now what a CD is, they probably don't even know what it is, and that since has gone onto the cloud. I mean, it's all just kind of like this progressive this progressive status, or, I mentioned earlier about completion meetings where you'd be in a room of hundreds of documents. Now it's all done on DocuSign. We have adapted and changed. Specialization's the other one that comes up here. Like, we've gone from being, highly generalist lawyers getting more and more specialist. Now, I know we're in-house, and actually one of the specialisms of being in-house is that you're a generalist. But really what you've got is the lawyer who is at the end of the road, who used to answer all your questions. As the world has got more specialists, we've really drilled down. And if you'd said to a lawyer way back when, who was this, absolute generalist, actually, it's going to get really complicated, and you're going to have your own residential lawyers and your own corporate lawyers, and you won't be able to do family law and criminal law at the same time as working out, someone's banking situation. They probably would have absolutely had a panic attack and said, that's a lot of my work. But actually, we adapt. Other ideas, I had as I was putting this together, access to information. I mean, goodness me, I still wonder, and I feel really old saying this, but do law students still go to a library? I used to have to go to a library and book out an article, the physical article. I used to have to go and book it and take it out and read it in paper format. It's just, that's probably feels crazy to generations now, but access to information has changed dramatically. Stakeholder expectations, again, massively changed from, we see things where it used to be in-person meetings all the time, right through to now, we have Zoom meetings or even like on-demand information. It's just, changed the way that we deliver services. Balance and culture. I mean, I think there's clearly a long way to go with this, but there's a huge mind shift that's changed here as well. Being stuck at your desk, COVID did a huge amount to free people away from the restraints to their desk. But again, like, we have made big inroads. DE&I, a long way to go still, but wow, what a change we've made over probably the past 50 years, maybe even less than that, probably a lot less than that. It's massive changes. And then the shaping role of our lawyers. It's not just the person who will tell you whether you're breaking a law or not. Actually, the role of a lawyer is completely evolved and is kind of the guardian of risk, the guardian of ethical behavior. It's massively shifted. So where I get a lot of comfort, actually, is from looking at this and saying, okay, AI and tech feels like the really big thing now, but we've done a lot previously to this, and we've got through it, and we all morph and we all move on. And that's really powerful. I don't know whether, Rich, you've got anything you want to add there, or if anyone else has got anything they want to add, any other ways that they manage kind of the burden, I suppose, of thinking about the future.
Yeah, I think it's that adaptability bit kind of comes back again. Excuse me. But yeah, I think we've adapted to different things, incorporated and adapted and evolved. And I think, like you say, I used to go to the library all the time to read books on computers, whatever. Like, now it's just at the touch of your fingertips. It's changed. There's a lot more information available to you. Now the problem almost is like sifting through the volumes of information. It just changes what the problem is necessarily, but kind of adapting to these different bits and incorporating. I think it's getting is that comfortability with change. Like, I think locking down what everyone does today is possible over a short period of time, maybe like 2 years, whatever. You could say, like, my role won't change in the next, perhaps looking backwards, but my role hasn't changed in 2 years. But then you look over a 10-year time period, things have changed significantly. I think AI is just another one of those tools in the toolbox that allows us to adapt and change. And I think the resistance of that is where problems might, surface and encounter. That's where friction's going to come from. But I think from an adaptability perspective, we'll evolve. Like, look at, you mentioned before about jobs that exist today that didn't exist in the past. My son's going through his GCSEs, doing business studies, and I think I might have the numbers wrong here, but his teacher said that something like 65% of the jobs that exist in the future don't exist today. There's plenty of opportunity for totally different things. Like, for example, look, who would have thought 20 years ago that people would make money from producing videos and uploading to YouTube? Kind of boggles the mind. I don't think you could have predicted that looking forwards, but it is how people make money. Like 200 years ago, I think it was something like 80% of people were farmers.
Wow.
Totally changed. That number doesn't now. That's kind of done by automated driven tractors and stuff like that in the main, like in particular the larger kind of farming industry. But yeah, things just evolve and adapt, and I think it's kind of me personally getting comfortable with kind of evolving with. It's almost like the boat on the sea, kind of like you ride with the waves rather than trying to fight the waves, and you can kind of you get where you get to, but you kind of just adapt and evolve over that time period. I think that's true, and I think just kind of bringing it back to what we said before about kind of the junior roles as well, and how do people kind of come through, and I think that is really our responsibility as kind of maybe on the more experience, kind of been in the role a few times, over a period of time as well. I think it's just always got to connect it back to that. And I think there's something I read as well to do with like work from home, work from office. So I've got a family. The work from home is particularly beneficial for me and my mental health with like working for, kids ill or this, that, and the other. You can kind of evolve and adapt. I think that a little bit of the double whammy for people coming into the field is that, number one, kind of like passing down information from the more senior things. And I think that the work from home, work from office has changed the dynamic in people coming into the workplace as well. So when I came into the workplace, everybody was in the same office, and you kind of like those relationships were established because you're in the same office. Now with hybrid and work from home becoming much more relevant, I think that's another impact on people coming into the field as well. So again, just touching on that bit, I think it's such an important thing that not only is the job changing, but I think that the dynamics of how the work happens changes, and I think it is totally our responsibility to help that next generation come into the workforce, adapt and evolve and get that experience. But I think it's such an important part.
And that's really, it is really interesting because actually, I mean, I think this is really where human skills come in, and I've got this wasn't even in my kind of my thought process when I was putting this together this angle. So it's not like we've all built up towards a massive sales pitch for what we do, but human skills really are at the heart of all of this, right? So human skills are the bit that we need to add on to tech. In order to kind of maximize our contribution alongside tech, it's the human skills. It's the communication, the connection, the empathy, the vulnerability, the physical, psychological safety, the teamwork, all of that. But not just that, it's about supporting our teams to be agile, to be able to deal with the change. Because I think one of the certainties in this uncertain world is that change is happening quicker and quicker and quicker because of like the speed that we have. So actually, we need to be adept, and our juniors certainly need to be adept at changing, like being adaptable, not letting that kind of completely throw them. Being able to remain true to our individual values, but also our team values through difficult times and volatile situations. So it becomes even more important. It's not just about being able to work alongside tech and having the human skills, but actually it's having the human skills to just be able to cope with that level of change. And to date, I just don't think that is featured enough in any sort of training, legal training that we do. It's still too focused on the academic stuff, or the cognitive stuff, which actually can be largely replaced. Really, really interesting. I know this might be a little bit unfair, and Jodie, mainly because I can see it says Barbary, I would love to get your view on this because obviously Barbary do a huge amount of work with the training. If that's a really unfair question, tell me to jog on. But in terms of like, what are you seeing with the juniors and the way that they're responding to this, and how you're bringing them in?
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I'm happy to sort of give a perspective in that it's variable by firm. We're seeing some firms that are really kind of adopting AI and really wanting to sort of get juniors embedded in that from the very start. We're starting to see people coming through from their university experiences more sort of equipped with AI type skills and kind of wanting to utilize that and wanting to bring that into their roles. But we equally are seeing lots of other firms, lots of, perhaps some of the smaller ones, whatever, that just are not even kind of at that stage where they're adopting lots of the document automation, that sort of aspect of things yet. So it really is variable across the industry, I think, at the moment. And we're seeing quite rapid adoption and quite rapid engagement from sort of junior talent in some parts of the industry, but then not in others. And I think sometimes with the junior talent, not necessarily because they don't want to, but just because maybe their firm isn't ready to sort of to embrace that or move that on at that stage.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Thanks for letting me pick on
No,
you.
that's fine.
So I suppose I wanted to end on a positive note, which is, that really kind of bringing it together, which is like we've kind of talked about a lot, but I suppose if we think about what we know about the legal profession, where we add value, where we spend most of our time, that AI will hopefully, and tech will free up a lot of potential to focus more on those areas where we add the greatest value, where we contribute the most, where we enjoy being, what the work that we enjoy doing. But to do that and to allow that, I think it's important to kind of really recognize that actually it can be really triggering, that it's okay, that it can make us really anxious, and to focus on like, well, how do we get to a point where we are supporting it to help us without it scaring us and derailing us. So I suppose my top 3 tips really to end was, one was, as we discussed a minute ago, focus on what you can control in the situation. We can't control what's coming out of, the next bit of tech. We can't control what will be open source and what won't be. We can't control even what the regulators are going to do. So really about like focusing on what you can control, how you can support your team, whether it's through helping them with their human skills training, whether it is with you learning more about the insides and outs of AI, but what can you do? Let's not worry about what the future holds in a really kind of hypothetical way, but what can you do? Look for evidence. Kind of, it's really powerful to look back and say we've been through this before. We can do this. We've been through change. We've done hard things. It may feel bigger than any of that, and it may feel faster, but we've been through tough times before, and finding the evidence for how we've adapted is really powerful. And then my last one is be kind to yourself. Like, I think sometimes we can beat ourselves up by saying, like, actually, I should be responding to this better. I shouldn't be letting it bother me. Why is this worrying me? As we said right at the beginning, it's a human propensity. We don't like change. We don't like big levels of change. It's an absolute threat to what we perceive to be our physical safety, and our ability to continue our gene pool. So be kind to yourself and recognize that. And I think that's where the benefit actually of coming together and all of us connecting over it is really powerful. So we've got some time for questions. So maybe we'll do that next. Maybe I'll put it out. I've got one more slide, but I think before I do that, has anyone got any questions that they want to raise, or any comments, or any kind of observations that they've seen, either for me, for Rich, for anyone else in the group? Haven't teed anyone up with any questions. No one's got any questions. Oh, well, we've bombarded them all, Rich. Well, if you have got any questions, then I mean, like, do just let either of us know. But I'm going to ask you all to leave with kind of one word. So when we joined, I was kind of like, how are you feeling about AI and tech? I would love to know if you just drop it into the chat, like one word to describe how you're leaving today's session. Would be really interesting. And Rich, I'll come to you. Have you got one word for how you're leaving?
I think that adaptability is the best word for me.
Oh, cool. Love it. So we've got optimistic, in control, curious, reassured, positive, inspired. These are great. Rebecca, I'm loving the use of the hyphen, in control with a hyphen. Makes it one word, right? Love it. So one more shout out if anyone's got any questions. Otherwise, we will finish a little bit ahead. ahead of time. But just to say that I will circulate the recording after this, and if anyone's got any questions or anything like that, then do get in touch. We're doing another virtual masterclass in April, and we've got in-person events happening in March as well. So do engage in the debate. You know, we talk about a lot, but I think it's one of the biggest things that is happening about how we manage this shift in momentum between change and adapting to it. Any final words from you, Rich?
No, it's good to talk, I think. It's nice to talk about the different things and hear people's different perspectives. So yeah, it's very enjoyable.
I think that's exactly it. It's good to talk. Is that Bob Hoskins said that in the BT adverts? Yeah, good to talk.
Yeah.
On that bombshell, maybe we'll leave it there. Thanks everybody very much for joining today, and I hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.